the March Q&A session with Tua Madsen. If you guys
Hello
can
there.
hear, put some groovy text in the chat there. Everyone's saying hey, 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 groovy. Yeah, new word today. Um, if this is your first Q&A session, welcome, welcome. Typically, what we do is we just ask your questions and answer your questions. So if you do want to ask a question to me or to a Madsen, um, go ahead and put a bracket, a Q, and then another bracket, and then put your question after that, and we will see your question. Amrish will be fielding the questions to me, so if you need to get his attention, that's who you contact there. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good. I'm just kicked out the people from today's session. Like literally, I heard the taxi just leaving right now. So very busy.
It's just us now.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead and type in your questions, guys. We are ready to go. So let me see what we have here for the first question. So first question comes from R. Wolf. He says, "What were the C-Watt rumble tracks, and what mics did you use, and in what positions?"
Ula. The CWAT is a preamp from Salvation Mod that I use in my Randall. Uh, Hold on 1 second.
Okay, no worries. How are you guys doing today? I see lots of questions pouring in. That's awesome. Thank you guys also for joining us, and hopefully you guys have been having some luck.
This
Oh,
one.
that's awesome.
Yeah. And it's, as you can probably guess from the logo, it's a type of high watt, want to do some kind of high watt but amp. But, I was never a fan of high watt amps, ever. So when I talked to Antonin, who is the guy behind Salvation Mods, I told him I would like a sound kind of like this and that. And then he said, I should try this one. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And take it home. If you don't, I'm sure you'll like it. If you don't like it, I'll fix it for you. So you will like it. And then I brought it home and it was everything I ever dreamed of. It sounds completely broken, like Tony Iommi back in the 70s. Messed up sound, and when I presented it, we didn't use it for the initial setup of the guitar sound on the Meshuggah record. We had a combination of rectifier, 14, Mike 14 version of a Marshall. We had a Engel Savage and the Satan Randall amp as well, and we liked that. But then when I connected this one day in a break and was just playing for a little bit by myself, and Frederick heard it. He was like, "Wow, this is so massive!" And we had an idea to use it on some of the stony riffs in just in small parts, really. But then once we plugged tried to reamp it and plug the guitar into it, everybody was just like, this is so massive. We have to use this on the whole album. And I was like, really? Because when you have the tracks at home, when you listen to it, this is not even by far not even the worst track on the record. Because some of these songs you started reamping, and having turned everything down on the desk, like, because it's just reamp. Do the same for the next song, and then you hear the sound coming from the room, and you're just like, this can't be right. It's got to be something wrong. And then let's turn up the tracks, and then yeah, it works together. But what's happening in that room with this red thing was just wrong in all the right ways. And so it is a huge part of the guitar sound on the whole record. And it adds, um, a whole dimension of for the low end, which is just different than what we got from any of the other amps. So that's what it is. I think I'm not even sure what I used, but I think we used this uh, Roya. It wasn't a Roya mic. It was like some Chinese copy, which is one of the better ones. And I'm pretty sure that's the one we used for it. But as far as I remember, there's also some room tracks, which was, if I remember correctly, a AKG 414 placed behind the cabinets. You probably saw, or some of you might have seen the picture from where the amps, how the amps were set up when we did the album, which was like a half circle or something in the same room, and the room mic was behind all those cabinets, and then there was a sliding door to the drum room, live room, and there's a stereo track, which is two of the drum ambience mics in the drum room, so really far away. It's I'm not sure how much it's used in the end mix, but it was like, okay, we have these things set up, might as well record it and see what I can use it for later when we start mixing. It was more like a case of we have all this set up, let's just record it. I probably it's pretty far out to use all of it way loud, but you never know what you end up liking when you start mixing. So that's the story
Yeah, I
behind
mean,
it.
it's always great to have like when you're in a tough spot in a song, and you're just trying to get this certain sound, and then it's just great to have like that big palette of options and just be like, oh, what does this sound like? Turn this up here and turn this down there. I love that approach. That's really cool. Okay, let's go to the next question. Robin LeJohn, he asks, "Hey Tua, how did you pan your cymbals on this record? Since there's a far left, left, and right."
Yes. Well, like I would have to open up the session to actually know this. I can do this, but my guess it would be set maybe not 100% for the far right and left, but 90 or pretty far out to each side, and then have the other ones at like 30 or something. It's panned like you see it. Um, yeah,
Cool.
that's really it.
Raphael Sanson says, "What are the drum reamp tracks and how were they made?"
Yeah. They were a messed up idea. For Thomas to for Thomas to play right, he has to, like most drummers, he has to fill up the not fill up, but like have some pillows in the bass drums, so that you don't get a floppy response from the kick drums when you're playing this dun, 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 kind of thing. You need He needs like a pretty solid surface for the kick drum. So there's pillows in the bass drums, but we kind of everybody, not just me, but the band and me, we kind of wanted the bass drum to sound bigger and like an empty bass drum. I know Frederick has this. um he bought like 4 or 5 Ludwig uh, drum kits to make up his own drum kit, which consists of only Ludwig bass drums. So all the toms are 24-inch bass drums or something like that. Crazy, and but it's such an amazing sound, and we wanted to get some of that into this, and that's not possible with pillows in the kick drums, of course. So um, instead, we talked about, or what we did was, after we finished all the drum tracks and we edited everything together, I ran the first. It was actually only the bass drums, but it gave. I ran that through a speaker and placed, or two speakers, and placed it in front of the two. bass drums, which we had now emptied for all pillows, so they would just go wow, and then run the close mic from the bass drum through the speaker, and then mic the bass drum again. And that's why I noticed some of you were like, I never saw so many mics for a kick drum ever in my life, and it's stupid, I know, but that's how it ends up because we wanted to capture that pound from the bass drum, and to make sure we did that, we were. I felt it necessary to record the same. I had two bass drum mics placed in the bass drum, and some room mics. There was one really close to the outside of the bass drum, and there was just regular room mics in the room to make sure we got everything of that movement. Call it Led Zeppelin, trying to get a little bit of that old school Led Zeppelin massive drum kit thing into Meshuggah sound, and that's how it was done. And then I found that once I did this with the kick drums, the toms started to suffer from not having that same. So I also routed the bass drum, the toms, through the same in the same reamp session. So you also got this for whenever he hit the toms. I think there was even a bit of snare in there, but you can hear that on the tracks. It was because everything else would have been muted. So yeah.
That's awesome.
and
I
it
mean,
and it works very much like the C-Watt in a way for the drum kit. It fills up, um, yeah, the physique of the drum kit, so it's not just like clickety click click click, and all the precision that you also need from for Sugar Record to work, but it fills up the room in a different way that I would have a very hard time coming up with using reverbs and stuff, but this was a fun way to do it.
it kind of reminds me of like the Foley approach of making a movie. Like when somebody opens a door, it's not just someone sticking a microphone in front of the door and then opening that door in front of the microphone. It's like seven different door sounds, like layered, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like that.
exactly.
That's kind of the lengths that you have to go to get massive sounding
Yeah,
records, I guess.
yeah. In this case, I guess it has a lot to do with your being a metal band, metal production. It's very massive. The whole thing is filled up with distorted guitars and stuff. So you have to pick your moments, kind of like sometimes if someone goes, I want to hear the bass louder or something, it might not be about making the bass louder at all. It might be it's probably about finding the frequency of the bass that you would like to hear, and just make sure that sticks out because you already have the bass placed where it should be. So it's more like finding that piece of character you're missing and enhancing that. I think that's what we use those tracks for, part of it.
Absolutely. So this next question, I think is it's definitely it's been coming, and I'm going to combine two different questions together. So we have Marty, and he asks,
Oh,
"What
can
was the reason?"
can I
What?
can I just answer one thing because now I opened the session.
Oh, okay, yeah, the
The
panning.
overheads are panned 84, 49, and 7365. No, that's a hi-hat. 73 for the right side. So it's like not 100%. It's kind of like, but it's based on what I hear. It's like I probably started out 100 for the far pannings, but then decided that the cymbals sounded out of the drum kit because that sometimes happens, and you need to bring it a little bit into the middle, and then all of a sudden everything blends. So uh, if you change little things about the mix, that panning is probably going to change also because it's going to sound different. depending on how you use the room tracks and stuff like that. So okay, but you had a new question.
Yeah. So Marty is asking, what was the reasoning behind recording 20 guitar tracks? And Wesley asks, how do you organize all of those guitars?
Yeah, uh, the
I'm
reasoning
sure
must
you'll
be
show us some of
madness.
this at Nail the Mix.
Yeah. the the reason for all the guitar tracks is just madness. Frederick wanted to pack up everything he had back in Sweden and bring it down there, but ended up only bringing, I think, 6 amps. And there was two we didn't use. He brought an orange and a framers that we didn't use. I was never personally a big fan of the framers amp. I don't think Frederick was either. He just wanted to bring it to have options. And the orange was, I think his idea was kind of what we ended up doing with the C-Watt. But the problem with the orange was that it would have to be at absolutely maximum volume, and having everything in the same room would just not be possible because it would overpower every other amp in the room. Um, but the reason there's 20 guitar tracks is because we had the rectifier, which is an old time love of Frederick's, um, and which sounds amazing. And then there's his all time favorite, the Marshall Mike 14 modeled Marshall amp. And then he brought the Satan amp from Randall. Or actually, this is a Mike 14 version as well. And my Engel Savage, which he asked me to bring. And we had all of them set up. Just put one mic on each of them. Um, Listen to the first one. If it sounded good, we didn't change anything. If it sounded bad, we tried moving the mic, changing the mic, and we never got the for some reason we never got the Satan amp to sound just right. So we ended up running, instead of using a cabinet, we ended up running that through a torpedo load box with the that he has for his live setup, I think, that has these cap simulations, and you will see. I think those tracks are called Torpedo or Torp. I can see. I can check. I have it here. Yes, they're called Torp. No, yes, Torp Direct and Torp Rum, which is room in Danish. Um, and that would be the direct is obviously the mic right in front of the cabinet from the torpedo. This is like so we're talking simulation here. And the room part of it, which is always panned to the, in my mixes, panned to the opposite as all the amps that it's following. So to give like a reverby type, it's like a distant mic, um, and you don't when you're in the mix and everything is playing, you don't really notice whether you turn this on and off. It's mainly for guitar breaks to have where you have a guitar panned all the way to the left, and to have some sort of something on the right, uh, um, on the other ear, so you don't feel like your whole brain is being pulled out of this ear. We put this room mic from the torpedo on the other side to give it that, not reverb but ambience. Um, and once you set up these amps, what happens is we start out with the rectifier in the order you see them. You start out with the rectifier, and yeah, this sounds amazing. And just like he recognizes the sound that he's used to. And then moving on to the Marshall, and then you blend it in a way that works nicely, and then the Engel, and then everything, and then you kind of build a guitar sound on the spot, which is a mix of all these 5 amps, and the that mix that we did in Pook where we recorded it is I'm pretty sure if not exactly, then very close to being what we ended up with. Of course, having the torpedo being a digital simulation box, it doesn't add up. It doesn't fit the timing of the real amps. So I have a time adjuster plug-in I zoomed in and found some. It can be very difficult to find the same sound on different tracks that are not aligned. But I found 240 sample delay on the real amps worked well to match up with the timing, the delay of the torpedo being digital on that. So that's how that's set up. So each set of 4 tracks, 5 tracks, and a DI 6 tracks. And then we played 4 guitars for everything, 2 on full volume, and then 2 where he turned down the volume knob on the guitar to about half, mainly to get that um, percussive, the pick sound out of it to blend in for clarity, kind of. And then you end up with 24 tracks. You didn't even want to, but once you start this mad race, there's no going back. So now you got all. That's why it ends up being what 4 gigabytes or whatever for one song. Sorry.
Yeah, I can tell just by looking at all the questions here, there's a lot of people that are just so intrigued by this approach, and it's not something that they're used to. So there's a couple questions in here about the timing and the phase alignment of all these tracks. Is there something that you can sort of speak to with that?
With the regarding the guitars,
Yeah.
um,
I
well,
guess a more specific question I could ask you is, are you going in there and moving tracks around? You did mention that you had some time adjustment on one track. Are you going in there and looking at the phase waveforms and making sure they line up, or
yes,
yeah?
exactly. I know that blending the real amps, meaning the rectifier, the Marshall, and the Engel, those are going to be in time aligned. They are going to fit. But the torpedo obviously is very easy to hear. It doesn't fit with the other ones. And and then I tried to find different points like something that you know what do you call that, like a transient, but a transient doesn't look the same when it passes through 3 different amps. It looks very different, so it's very difficult to be sure exactly when you don't know what the delay of the torpedo is, because none of us knew. So I just picked a few different spots where I try, okay, here it looks like if I delay it 216, it's going to match, and then try and see if you think it sounds right. And and then in another position, it might look like 212 or something. So I did a lot of more or less random places I picked out to try, and then over the course of I don't think we got that time the first time around, but after uh, messing with that a few times, we ended up on 214, which is how we recorded it. That's the sound we listened to, and that then once you decide this is the right, this is where we think the sounds blend in the way that we like to hear it. Then you start making you blend the mics or the amps in a way. You sort of set the rules, and from those rules you start doing it. It's not something I've been fooling around with a lot at all afterwards. Once we decided, that's where it stayed. Of course, when I came home and started mixing, I double checked this, but still found that if I started to move it, if you just move though, change the delay by one or two samples, it sounds completely different. And and because I've been listening to this guitar sound for 3 weeks, it just seems wrong right away. So I didn't change any of that once I came home. One, because I felt it sounded wrong, and another thing, this is the sound that we've been living with, and we were all really happy with in the studio. So if we're happy with it in the studio, I don't feel like changing the basic rules of time alignment of those amps, because it's really gonna change the character of the sound, and that's something we were really uh, thorough, making sure that it felt right. And just looking on Frederick's face when he was playing, you knew that this felt right to him. This was a good feeling playing with the sound. So I think changing that would just be wrong for me.
That's a really good insight. So
That's of course regarding the guitars. Drums is a different matter, or or not really actually, because I know there's a lot of people who move tracks around to make. I don't do that. I set up my mics and make a mix of the drums in the studio already while recording, um, so I like what I'm hearing, and I'm moving those mics around and changing EQs or compression and stuff so that it works in a way that I like. And the drum room in Pook Studio is amazing to my ears. I love that place. So, and once you start moving those ambience tracks in time, it's going to be something completely different. And that might not be bad at all. We'll see once we get the mix competition going, because someone are probably going to do that, and it might actually sound amazing. But oh, sorry, we were in this studio and loved the sound of it. They picked me and the studio because they loved the sound of the haunted albums that we did in the studio. So given all these different um, preferences and reasonings and stuff. Um, I I wouldn't want to move the drum tracks in time, but it's not really something I ever do. I mean, yeah, you might see me do it on some mixes or something, but it's not my first go-to tool at all. That's for me, it's more about getting what's going on here to work in the way that it's working. Um, and the delay that you get from the actual snare to where the room mic might be placed, that's part of the sound. If you move the room mics up so that they are time aligned with the snare drum, it's going to be a completely different room listening to it. It might sound really good, but it's going to be different. And I like room mics to be far away. As some of you may know, I have a pool for drums that I use for recording drums, and I have like usually 3 or 4 stereo set of mics in the pool, and some of them are really close to the drum kit, and some of them are far away, and it gives different atmosphere. That I don't necessarily use all of them or any of them all the time, but it's possibilities and very different ones.
yeah, with guitars, you don't necessarily want a lot of distance or space, especially when you're trying to do very tight rhythms and tight, saturated sounds. So
Yeah.
it makes complete sense that you would move things around and fabricate the guitar tone in such a way versus with drums where you actually want some of that distance and that ambience.
Yeah. Because
Um,
you hear very little on the finished mix. There's very little reverb used on that album. Most of what you hear is from mics in the room. I think I might have a little bit of reverb on the snare for some songs, and probably maybe not even all of them. And most of it is coming from the room, actually.
I always prefer to capture natural ambience on drums, especially.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, we're going to switch gears to bass here. Robert asks, can you talk about the bass tone in the final mix? It's really amazing.
Yeah. They also brought down a huge Ampeg stack. Like again, Frederick found not an 8 by 10, but a 9 by 10, um, 9 speaker Ampeg cabinet that they bought for the bass, and an old Ampeg head that, of course, only sounds good when it's at absolutely maximum volume. So, and it did sound amazing. Thing is, and I recorded 2 microphones for that cabinet, and I think it sounds really really good. Thing is that Dick has spent a long time fine tuning his pickups in his bass and his pedals and everything, and working with the people who built his bass for him, and making sure everything is just the way he likes it. So what you hear on the record is what comes out dry from his pedals. And maybe maybe just out of sheer principle, I had a like maybe 2% of one of the microphones in there because, god damn it, I want to use it. But we started out with a mix of his pedals and the microphones. And on the first day we started playing, and then after a few songs, Dick was like, how much of the microphones do you have in the mix for me? And I was like, well, I don't know how to answer that question really, but there's some mic. Can you maybe try taking it down a little? And then half an hour later, can you maybe try taking it down a little bit more? And then in the end, it was like down to nothing. It was just his bass passing through his 3 distortion pedals and straight into the board. And once I did that and removed the microphones completely, he was a happy guy. So it just goes to show that the guy actually knows what he did with his gear, which is something which is a lesson for everybody, I guess. Really, he spent years playing in this band, fine tuning his equipment, finding out what works with this band. And what works is Dick's bass sound, like he set everything up. And so that is the mix. I use a 4 band compressor, which changes the sound a little bit, and I use some EQ, pretty much like I just described, having the bass set in where it should be, and then using the EQ to enhance the parts of the bass sound that I would like to be able to hear more once you plaster the wall with guitars and you can't hear the bass anymore. Then you need, instead of just raising the bass, it's just going to be like, oh, I raised the bass. Ah, now the guitars are too low. Ah, I got to raise the bass, and everything's going to be louder. Now I can't hear the drums anymore and stuff like that. So instead of going that way, it's the EQ. The 4 band compressor is used to make sure that no frequencies will get away in the mix, like all of a sudden be. And the EQ is used to make sure that I hear exactly the parts of the bass sound that I would like to hear through the guitars and the drums and everything else. You gotta find the space, which is maybe sometimes just a little peak. That's your bass frequency. And then, along with everything that goes on in the bottom, makes the bass clear for everybody. That's how I did that one.
Awesome. Uh, so Steven asks, how did you deal with the insane amount of cymbal bleed on the snare?
Yeah, I wish it wasn't there, but it is. And Thomas plays with a lot of ghost notes, and on mainly on the opening track, but all the time actually. So using gates on the snare, I tried it, and I think it just sounds stupid no matter what I did. I've been reading some of the comments from some people who start to map it out as MIDI and fool around with samples and stuff, but that was not really the purpose of the album. The purpose was to record a band that sounds like a band playing. So I have also tried samples, but always ended up with the feeling that it didn't sound right anymore. And then I would have to spend a lot of time trying to get the sample player or whatever um, to try to replicate real life. And I just never got that to work. So what I'm using is, the snare as it is. And I don't think there's any gates on the snare on this album. And well, yes, in some parts there are. Um, it's hard, but it's trying out. I mean, I'm using an SSL plugin and from Waves, um, and I'm pretty sure I'm not using the gate on that one. I'm using some compression, some EQ. And I also have, I'm pretty sure, a filter bank EQ, which is my go-to EQ for everything, really. Yes, and that's and it and with the because I've been using that one forever, so I know whatever I need from anything, I could get it in 10 seconds if I use that one. For a while I didn't upgrade it, and I was like, and I was pissed off with those guys because they removed the phase reverse button from the EQ, and I was pissed off, and I didn't want to upgrade because I'm like, but then I started out mixing this record without it back when I was upgrading to Pro Tools 11, I think, or something, and um, and I decided they don't own me. I can use whatever the fuck I want. And then I just started mixing using the channel strip or whatever was in Pro Tools already, or I had from the countless other EQs. And it was a struggle. I mean, I think I got through 4 or 5 songs, and then finally we got to a part where they wanted a radio voice, and I knew that what I wanted to do I could get in 10 seconds with the filter bank filter plugin. So finally, I gave up and I paid the $100 for the upgrade. Cheap me, and I got it. And then once I bought the upgrade, I was like, well, maybe I should see what the EQ does to all the other tracks, and then I could get the mix like that. So it's just like that plugin is in my DNA for some reason. I can get some of the same from Metric Halo, um, but I'm just more used to this one. Those two, I don't know. I know there are tests, zero out test, and what do you null tests or what do you call it, that say that they're all the same and stuff. But I just feel a difference. For those two plugins, I can get guitar sounds and drum sounds and everything like this. Any other plugin, it'll take me days, and I'll never get to where what I want anyway. So for the snare, it's an SSL Waves plugin with a bit of compression, a little bit of EQ, but um, and then I like that one to get to a certain point, and then I always put my filter bank after it, and then I can get the same way I explained about the bass, get those frequencies that I like. I'd like to say that back when we did this album, I did not have any DrumForge plugins, which I have since gotten, and I'd say the EQ plugin from DrumForge and also the what's it called, Excite,
Hmm.
is an amazing tool for this. If you have gotten us to a certain point where you think everything is working really nicely now, and then you start working on bass. Ah, I really like the drum sound, but it's like
Uh-oh.
something got lost now.
Hope we didn't lose
I
him.
can get that from,
Let me know
yeah.
if you guys can
Oh, you.
still hear and see me. Okay, we're
I
back.
think I'm back now.
Yep.
Uh, and when once you start piling all the other instruments, and then you end up drowning the drums in the end, or half drowning, and then if you want to, I'd like that crack in the snare. But if I EQ in more crack in the snare now, it just gets this cheap sound of too much EQ or something, and that's where I find the Excite thing extremely good to just. I mean, I put it on the snare pretty late in my mixes whenever I have problems like that, and I can just add like one or two, which is next to nothing. You can't hear it, but in the mix, it brings out exactly those little things, but in a way that still works really nicely with the mix. So that's a new trick I did not use in this record because I didn't know about those plugins back then. But I'll
It's
pass it
nice to
forward.
know that the plugins do what they're supposed to do. That it's exactly how it's supposed to be used. Is like you have like an already awesome sound, and then you put that plugin on there, and you just give it that 5 more % that takes it across the finish line. So that's
One
awesome.
one thing that's a little bit of a problem with it is that it sounds so damn good. I was mixing a live DVD for Behemoth recently, and I had the situation I just described. I was like everything sounds good, but I'm like could I use a little bit more click on the bass drums and snap to the snare and stuff, and so I added a little bit on the kicks and the snare and the toms, and then a little bit more, and I got greedy because it sounded really fucking good. And the pretty much the only comment once I sent them the mix, pretty much the only comment was maybe there's a little bit too much click in the kick drums and in the toms and in the snare. So I had to go in and back it up a little bit, but it did sound good. It was just too much.
That's awesome. So next question, Sebastian asks, what happened to the bottom snare track?
I don't know what happened. It's is there a problem with it?
I don't know. I was hoping that
Oh,
you would know.
oh yeah, I see it now. Yeah, Book Studio is is not being used all the time. I think before we were there, I don't think anybody been there for like 8 months or something. And they turned on the studio about a month prior to our arrival, and everything worked, but sometimes once you go for lunch and you come back an hour or two later, and then there's no sound coming through the bass drum or the snare, or in this time, and I'm pretty sure what happened was that happened, and then you had to go and massage the gain knob or the EQ switch or something until it was working again. And apparently that slipped a few times because then once you massage it and you find the sweet spot where now it's working, so let's start recording, and it might not be in the same position as it was before, and I'm sorry about that, but that's what
Hey
happened.
man,
The desk sounds really amazing. It's an SSL 9000. It sounds really good. The room sounds really good, and those were the primary reasons for us being there. But so you have to deal with some mishaps, and that's one of them. I see it now.
Yeah, some compromise, I guess. Let's see here. Man, there's a lot of questions, but I'm gonna try and just get the best ones going here. This is a good one. So Andres, I think that's right, Marquez asks, what was your biggest challenge when mixing Monstrosity? Was it a challenge at all for you? I believed you achieved great source sounds, and it must have been more about picking and choosing.
Um, Actually, not so much picking and choosing because, like I explained earlier, we uh, already blended the sounds in the studio in a way that we were happy with. So it might be six or seven, counting the Seaward tracks and everything. A lot of guitar tracks, anyway. Um, but it was sort of already. And if it was faders, 10 faders for one guitar, they were already set in a way that we liked. So it wasn't so much about picking and choosing because we already. I could have blended all these tracks down to one and just recorded one guitar track, but I don't like to do that. First, you don't have to with Pro Tools or any. Nowadays, you don't have to. You can record as many tracks as you want, which is good and bad because then you do, and then you have a shitload of extra cleaning up to do later sometime. Or deciding when mixing other people's recordings and they did the same thing, and so there's problems with that, but in this case it was like a safety thing. Get everything. We set up a sound that we liked and we recorded it that way, but there was always the option of changing the levels of amps and making sure we didn't want to hear this amp louder and stuff. But it was pretty much set up that way in the studio, so it was more like a general EQ thing, like getting those collective tracks into an auxiliary track and then EQing it all together. And then sometimes you find out that some face things are happening you're not happy with, and then you have to go back to the original tracks and find out where that's coming from and what's making it wrong. But not so much picking and choosing because it's very much about using everything. I don't think I took out all the tracks that I muted except for the DI tracks. No, and there are, yeah, the microphone tracks for the bass, of course, is still there, but everything is being used. And there are some the there are some they're called RADI. They're not here. FX tracks, which are guitar noise or the extra. What do you call that? The noisy guitar tracks that go.
Yeah, I just call them effects.
Yeah, FX. Um, on some of the tracks, actually not in this song it seems, but on some of the tracks, yes, there is the solo has the effects that because Frederick recorded the solos at home in the studio in Stockholm and sent them to me later, and he sent them to me with the effects that he recorded them with, which is how he would like the solo to sound. But he always also sent them to me dry, and those are the um, Monstrosity Lead ADA VC file, which is just without effects. But I used his effects, added a little bit of my own, but very, very little, because whenever I did, he on most of the songs he wrote me back and, what did you do to my guitar sound? It sounds weird or something. And then I maybe EQ'd like 1 dB of something to add clarity or whatever, and then he would spot it, and it would seem out of place for him. So, but not on everyone. But yeah, that's the reason for that. Of course, there's some picking and choosing for that, but that's pretty easy. Either use his effects or add your own. And since he was very keen on using his own effects, it wasn't really a hard decision to make. Plus, he had my mixes to play the solos on top of my mixes. So it's not like it was night and day, and he was recording on a shitty rough mix from the studio day one. He was recording on something that was actually going to be the finished record. So it did fit in what he did at home. So
Nice. Eric Schultek asks, how has your mixing changed over the years? Are there any new things that you do now that you wish you could do years ago?
yes.
I think for all of us, it's everything.
I hope. I mean, yes, a lot of things change. I mean, taste change. And what I liked, sometimes I go back and hear something I did 10 years ago, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Why? How come I don't do that anymore? And other times I hear something I did 10 years ago, and I'm like, what the hell went wrong? I'm so happy I'm older and wiser now. Um, it's I've always, at least within the last 15 years, 10, 15 years, I try to keep it simple. I found out a long time ago that doing too much uh, does very little good for most mixes. Um, I remember helping out a friend with. I was stopping by his studio one day, and he said, "Could you maybe take a listen to this?" And because I'm like, I think the guitar sound is good, but it's not really working. And then I looked at his session, and the guitar tracks were going through like a tape simulation, and then some compression, and then some tube simulation, and then some EQ, and then another EQ, and then some compression, and some, there were like 8 plugins or something in row for the guitar sounds. And it sounded pretty good, but then I was like, I wonder what it sounded like without any of this. And then I bypassed every single plugin, and it just sounded amazing. Instead of like a cheesy demo, it sounded amazing. And I've
Yep.
had I've had those same experiences myself, of course, in the past. And so how I always try to avoid that is whenever I see myself putting more than 3 plugins on something, to make, unless if they're doing the same, try to bypass everything and see if it wasn't actually better before you started messing with everything. And quite a lot of times I find that, and I go back to zero. Okay, bypass everything, open one EQ and see how you can, instead of removing everything you don't like, maybe if you just add a little bit of, say you have a guitar track that's too scratchy and annoying in the high end, you can try and get rid of the scratchy and the high end, but you could also try to find a nice soft pillow for it to lie on, so it doesn't feel scratchy anymore. Like give it the right kind of low end, or maybe letting the bass compensate for what's annoying about the guitar. I mean, if you listen to uh, Entombed records, there are some guitar sounds and bass sounds that are definitely not nice in any universe, but it works together, and different things compensate for the painful parts of the sound. You find other instruments or other frequencies that will um make everything sound cool, and not be annoying. So but sometimes you have to get rid of stuff. Sometimes you get rid of too much stuff, and you end up with something you just torn apart, and then it's time to just start over. Get rid of everything. Just do a simple thing, because if the people who recorded it, in this case me, but when I'm mixing something that other people recorded, I always assume that they had an idea and they actually decided on this sound because they thought it was good. So just getting rid of everything to begin with is kind of arrogant, I think, to their recordings. Sometimes, of course, they will tell me that, yeah, the sound kind of sucks, so please redo everything, and then it's a different situation. But yeah, keeping it simple, trying to, if getting rid of everything you don't like doesn't work, then maybe don't do it, and try to add some of what you think is missing. Um, but just saying saying this makes me think of like 10 different mix situations where other things apply. Other truths were right about it. So I have to say, it's really about using your ears and deciding using your ears and what you like, your taste. Listen to what you got and go from there. Um, and keeping it simple to begin with is always a good idea, I think.
Keep it simple, keep evolving, and keep learning. I think
Yeah.
that's the real
Oh yeah,
truth.
completely forgot the question. I'll
That
have yeah,
was a good. It was a good answer though. That's a. I mean, I think this is a good insight for people to learn about from your side of the I guess the industry or whatever. Um,
yeah.
so Ricardo is asking, how different was your mix sounding after it was mastered by Thomas?
It was different. I sometimes have a tendency to mix darker. And one thing you have to know is I master most of my stuff myself. Not so much because I want to, but because I have had some really bad mastering experiences, and I've had some where, like, well, yeah, well, if I had like one go-to guy where I would just be comfortable, always just give, I would, but it hasn't worked out like that for me, and so I developed a method of working and mixing that, I guess, in the back of my head, when I listen to my mix, I have a chip built in the backside of my brain that says everything. Once you bring it into, once it gets mastered, you will, it will take care of this and that. And so I get good balances on my mix, but it might be sometimes, not always, but sometimes it will lack a bit of highs. The balance will be too much on the low side. And for me, it's really easy. I know this happens a lot, and when I take these mixes and put them in a different in a mastering session, even just to do a super fast uh, mastering, just to sort of show the band what I want, it I can get this in 10 seconds. It's really once I, it's like my brain changes gear into mastering mode, and then I know exactly what's wrong about it, and I can compensate for whatever I think is missing in the mix. So my Meshuggah mix was a bit too dark sounding, and I had a friend that I wanted to do a test mastering for it. I did one myself. Meshuggah had, even before we started the record, had an idea. They had, there were three different mastering guys they would like to try out, and they sent a few tracks to all three of them to decide which one. And Thomas's was, in my opinion, by far the best. I loved everything about it, and the band agreed. They were all like, um, it sounded amazing. And then, so there was no discussion. There was no point in me trying to outdo him because it sounded amazing what he did. And then I think there was some discussion about making it brighter to bring out a little bit more aggression from the tracks, and that happened in the second round of mastering, and that was it. I think Frederick did, like we all do probably. When you get something that's mastered, there's only one thing you can if you think it's not 100% perfect, you can put an EQ on it. It's not going to sound good because it's already maxed out, but it'll give you an idea of, so you can tell someone that when I put an EQ on, even if it's in iTunes, if I add a little bit of 4K, I think everything is better, and that's what Frederick did. He did something like this, and oh shit! Now my computer went into sleep mode. Am I
Are you
still
still
here?
good?
Yes. Okay. Um, and that's what he did, and I could. It sounded very distorted what he did, and I think he used some EQ matching or something. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Um, but then we talked about it, and I said, "Why send this thing to Thomas, and I'm sure he will know exactly how to get what you're looking for, but in a way that will sound much nicer." And that's exactly what happened. He found those frequencies. Um, I don't know how fast, but it seemed like nothing at all. It seemed like the next time he sent the master, it was right on the money. So it did change a little bit, but mainly adding some highs. My mix was a bit darker, but it's not like um, for me at least, it doesn't feel like night and day because it's how I would have done it myself. But he had a very nice way of doing it.
Yeah, I don't have so much experience working with other mastering engineers. I'm like you. I like to, well, not that you like to do it, but I personally like to master my own stuff just because I want to have control over everything. And
Yeah,
sometimes when I'm mixing or recording, even, I'm making decisions knowing how I'm going to deal with it later. So I totally
yeah,
understand.
yeah. But that's also the difficult part about involving an outside mastering guy because sometimes these days mixes go on forever. I mean, I recently mixed an album where I would send out mixes, and it would be 2 weeks before I heard back from the band. And how are you going to work with an outside mastering guy like that? Like, oh, we want to kind of change this and that, and then you go back and change this and that in the mix, and then have to send it to mastering, and then send it to the band because most bands are not capable of deciding on mixes unless it's already mastered. They will come back, oh, it's not playing as loud as everything else. No, because it's not mastered yet. Yeah, but it's still. So having an outside mastering guy involved in mixes like that, and where you maybe have to go back 5 or 6 times to do recalls, even for the smallest things, it's going to be really tedious work and impossible workflow in that way. So that's also part of the reason why I always do it myself.
Yep. So I want to jump onto a couple more topics here before we call it a day. But we have some questions here about the vocals. So Eric asks, hello, a lot of us in the forums had trouble with the vocals. Did you track them in stereo, and what kind of processing did you use to eliminate the harsh, high overtones in the screams? Or did you?
Um, Let me look. See, the thing is, first of all, all the vocals, or I'd say 90% of the vocals, were recorded with the band. We didn't really pay attention. Jens was just in a room by himself, screaming along with all the takes, and for as long as his voice would last. And then, if he did 4 or 7 or whatever takes of the song, and then started to feel, now it's getting rusty, he would just cut out, and then we would look at it later, and we found that, I think, 80 to 90% of what's on the record was recorded live with the band and pieced together from those takes afterwards. Um, he was using a tube mic that I have, a Chinese copy of some old Neumann or something that I have been using for ages. I love the sound of that microphone, and um, and I guess I like those aggressive sounds that it makes. Um, my chain is uh, a Bomb Factory 1176, which is my favorite vocal compressor. I use a 4-band compressor for vocals also. Um, EQ, a de-esser. That's it. It's pretty basic stuff. I guess there's no secret weapon that makes everything all right. It's very simple stuff. The thing is, I set up my chain of my vocal chain for the mix, and back in Stockholm, the guys in their studio have this DBX thing, not a compressor, but kind of a compressor. I can't remember the name of it now. Maybe it says here, but no, it doesn't. It just says DBX. I should ask before we do the nail the mix, so I can tell you all. Um, and so they got the vocal tracks up there just to run them through this thing, because they thought it had always, they used it for the last, I don't know, 2 3 or 4 records, and they always liked how it brought out the spit of the vocals, and they wanted to do this and then send it back to me, and then I could see how I liked it. And actually, what I felt like what I got back was pretty much how I used my chain of plugins to shape the vocals. So if I bypassed, if I did nothing to, if I bypassed my own chain of, or most of the chain, and just ran there, it was pretty close to the vocal sound that I had built. Um, I didn't do anything to get rid of any. I didn't consciously do anything to get rid of harshness of the vocals. I like it to be here and spit in my face and like feel the vocals to be very present, and that's sometimes hurt, and I don't mind that kind of pain. I guess how I explained EQing before, about if something is harsh and annoying to the ear, sometimes you can get rid of that, but sometimes it's better to other times it's better to find nicer parts of the sound and enhance those, so the annoying parts don't seem as annoying anymore. I guess the 4-band compressor is probably maybe what's saving what this guy refers to as harsh vocals. But actually, the way I use it, I like to bring out more of that harshness. So maybe it's the way that I compress those highs. So I do the same for the bass, really compress the highs quite a lot so that they don't stick out so much. You can't do the same for vocals, of course, because there's some understanding what's being said that you have to consider for vocals. But for bass, it's like if it's sometimes you want to hear those pick sounds or finger picking sounds like Steve Harris or something, but you don't want those tick, 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 tick things to stick out of the mix all the time. But if you compress them really hard, they won't get away from the mix. And if you compress them really hard, then you can put them in a level where they are constantly or almost constantly present, but they will never get away from the whole rest of the mix. Maybe that's the effect of what I'm doing to the vocals that makes it all right.
Yeah, and
Not
I
something
think
I
it
think about
also
consciously.
I think it also depends on your mixing style or how you're mixing everything else because if you have guitars taking up a lot of frequencies in this range where this harshness happens, then that harshness will disappear once it's combined with the rest of the elements.
Yeah.
So in some sense, you have to kind of take into consideration everything else. And I think one of like a repetitive piece of advice that we give them all the time is don't mix so much in solo because you never know how it'll affect the rest of the mix.
I do very little mixing in solo. Of course, you have to start somewhere, and I usually start out mixing the drums, um, and there's a certain amount of soloing there, of course. But for me, building a mix from scratch is very much about getting everything to play within the first hour or something. I
Yeah,
need to get everything into play to feel where the right areas are for the different instruments and how much of what's been recorded is actually good and how much I need to change. And if I start soloing because I want to get the perfect guitar sound, I mean, uh, it doesn't work like that for me because I don't believe there is such a thing as the perfect guitar sound. There's a perfect guitar sound for this record and another perfect one for this record.
yeah.
Um, People ask me all the time about, oh, what kind of amp did you use for this album or cabinet or whatever? Did you use which pedal did you use? And most of the time, I have no idea because it's. I mean, if you look, I don't know if you can see it,
Yeah,
but that's I don't know, 10 or 20 amps piled up back here. And, when I have a guitar player here, we try out different cabinets and different amps. And until the guitar player is happy and I'm happy, mostly I'm most concerned with the guitar player being happy because if he's happy, he's going to play better. Um, and if he plays better, it's going to sound better in the record. And then it doesn't really matter if it's a 5150 rectifier or Marshall or whatever. I can work with either of them. I like all of these amps, um, but it's about uh, getting everything to work together, and rather than picking those perfect guitar sounds. I don't think it works like that. Not for me anyway. And another point being that I don't want all my records to sound the same. I hope they don't. I want my records to sound like the bands I'm doing, and then I will help each band to be the best they can be. But I would hate for Sick of It All to sound the same as Moonspell or Meshuggah because it wouldn't be right. It's different things. Should be different.
absolutely. And speaking even more to how you said you don't know exactly where you ended up, that's just a result of trying everything you can to get the right sound. It's not
And
like
then
you're
once
going,
you,
go ahead.
and once you have that right sound, it's not important to me anymore. And that's what I wanted to say is
Yeah.
I don't know. Ask me about half the records I did. I don't know what we used. On some of them, for whatever reasons, I will know what we used and remember because maybe I just got this new amp and I know this was the first album I used it for. But on a lot of albums, I'm like, I have no idea because I don't really think it's important. The guitar player is important, and what makes him happy is important. But once he's happy, it's all about playing. It's about now you have to play good, and that's important. And then 2 weeks later, I can't remember which cab and which amp we used usually.
Yep.
Sorry.
So this is a good question by Peter, and I'm actually curious of this as well. He's asking, do you use reference tracks when you mix? And if so, what kind of tracks would you recommend for this style of music?
Mm. Not so much when I mix. I like to try and go where I think the tracks tell me to go, if that makes sense. Um, and if I start out using reference tracks at an early point, I will. I feel like I'm not gonna go where the tracks tell me to go. And some of my favorite records that I worked on sound very different, and not all of them are sounding sonically like the best record ever. But still, those some of those records still speak to me. So, and if you go through your record collection, not all your favorite records actually sound perfect. For me, it's not so much about that. I like to um, um, I guess listen to the tracks and try to enhance what I hear are the good parts of those tracks, rather than trying to get them to sound like Machine Head or Pantera or whatever, some band. Um, I think it's more for me. It's more important to make them sound like the actual band. I always use reference tracks after I finish a mix, or let me say, when I finish my first mix, I always put this mix into a mastering session where I have some tracks that I like to compare to. But that's more uh, regarding the high low balance, the punchiness, and to make sure that this will stand up to any other record. It's not so much about and then there are actually uh, Deftones Around the Fur is an all-time reference album for me, or the Doom Dak song.
Yeah.
I can't even remember the song, the title, but that one has been my reference forever since when did that come out in '94 or something?
94,
Because
yeah.
already back then it had a lot of low end, a lot of high end, a lot of wideness. It had punch, and I think in a lot of ways it still stands up today with to anything. And it's for me that is a. I have a few others, but that is a good reference in terms of have I made a mix that's really narrow and garage punk rock feeling and it's not supposed to? And if I compare to that one, I will know right away. And does it have uh, highs and lows? And I know, or does it have too much? It will easily tell me um, a lot of things, but it's not so much about trying to make it sound like Deftones at all. It's more about uh, making sure that the party doesn't stop if people put this new album on. After they've been listening to this one and that one, the party should continue when they put on my album. It shouldn't stop right there. And that's more how I like to use reference. Uh, it can also be helpful if bands tell you we really like the drum sound of this album, the guitar sound of that album. But one thing you also have to know is the snare of Wolverine Blues by Entombed only sounds so damn good because everything else around it sounds like it does. If you put that snare into any other record, it's probably going to suck because the rest of the record is going to sound different. And it can be a nice guideline if people tell you how they would like, but it's always just going to be a guideline, like not something to try to copy, but more like a direction of where we would like to be headed, I'd say. Um, I in mixing, I I don't think I ever use reference. I mean, well, no, it doesn't. Sometimes, but more for direction in some cases. Um, um, but not to actually try to copy a specific sound, a guitar sound or a snare sound. I don't think I ever did that. It's more
Yeah,
like
and I think
getting
something
right.
that's really important to say about this is you're talking about two different sides of the spectrum, because the person who's asking this
Yeah,
probably isn't as developed as you are in mixing. And
yeah,
so it's important for him to be doing some referencing, while for you, it could actually even be detrimental to the process.
yeah,
It's more important for you to go in your own direction and maybe use some referencing to guide you loosely in some sort of way, whereas the student or the person who's still working on their A game is still developing, the ability to hear, frequencies and to know where mid range is and all this stuff. So, um, if I was to ask Michael Jordan, how can I get better at basketball? What he tells me might not apply to me until 10 years later. So,
yes,
you got to think of it that way.
yeah.
So, okay, I think that's going to be it for today. I want to let you guys know, if there's a question that you asked and it didn't get answered, it will most likely be answered during Nail the Mix. Sometimes we like to save some of the more mix specific questions for the actual event, because then he can show you, which will be a lot better than him just telling you. So thank you guys for joining us. Thanks for asking your questions and continuing to be awesome and hang out with us. We really appreciate it. We want you guys to tune in to Nail the Mix. Don't miss it. This is going to be amazing. He's going to be flying down to our studio and showing us exactly what he did when he mixed the song, and I'm very excited to see that. So make sure you guys show up and bring your questions, any more questions that you have with you, and we'll see you guys soon. So take care. And thank you
See you
for
then.
joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Cool.